Presentation is on Stonefield Query, the Stonefield Query SDK. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about Stonefield software and Stonefield Query in particular, and then we'll spend about half of the webinar taking a look at Stonefield Query from end user perspective, so you can see how the product works and what your clients will experience when they use it. We'll then spend the second half of the webinar taking a look at Stonefield Query from a developer's perspective. I'll show you how to create a version of Stonefield Query that works with any database system. And then we'll wind up by talking about licensing and pricing issues. Stonefield has been in business for more than 15 years now. I and other members of the software development team have more than 20 years' experience building business applications. Some of our customers are some of the biggest and best-known companies in the world, including Warner Brothers and MGM Studios, British Petroleum, Estée Lauder, Kenworth Trucking, Verizon, PayPal, Sealy Mattress, and so on. Lots of organizations I'm sure you've heard of. Stonefield Query was initially released more than 10 years ago, actually 11 years ago now, as kind of a misnamed product. It wasn't really a querying tool. It was really a filter builder. A few years after that, we released a product called Stonefield Reports, which is the progenitor for what we're now calling Stonefield Query. In 2000, we created a customized version of Stonefield Query for the ACPAC accounting system. We call it a Stonefield Query for ACPAC because we like that name a little bit better. Well, Stonefield Query for ACPAC became so popular with ACPAC customers that ACPAC International licensed the software from us. So we created a private labeled version just for them, called it ACPAC Query, put their name and their logo and so on it. And that's what you buy today, is ACPAC Query from ACPAC International or from their reseller channel. Well, it worked out pretty well, so we started creating customized versions of Stonefield Query for other products. And so to date, we have versions available for Goldmine, SalesLogix. Goldmine is a very popular contact manager. SalesLogix is a higher-end CRM or customer relationship management system. Heat, which is help desk software. ACT, which is probably the most popular contact manager in the world. Simply Accounting, which is a lower-end accounting package. And AccountMate, which is another accounting system. We're also just putting the finishing touches on a version for Timberline, which is a construction accounting package. 4 years ago, we released our SDK. We used to call it the Developers Edition, but we now call it the SDK, which, unlike these other products, is not specific for a certain application's database. It's completely wide open. You can customize it to work with any application at all. In May of 2000, Stonefield Query won the Developer's Choice Award for Best Reporting Tool over several competing products, including Crystal Reports. 4 years ago, we won a number of awards, including Gold Award for Best Integration to Goldmine and the Platinum Award for Best Integration to Heat. As you probably know, reporting is a weakness in many applications. Although there are a number of great reporting tools out there, like Crystal Reports and Cognos and things like that, none of them are really what you consider to be end-user reporting tools. And the reason I say that is because in order to use a tool like Crystal, the user has to be familiar with three things. First of all, the user interface of the report writer itself. In the case of Crystal, it's a very rich and powerful tool that has lots of dialogues, lots of choices, lots of kind of confusing options. It has a pretty long learning curve, even for technical folks like us, let alone for the average end user. The second thing the user has to be familiar with are database concepts. They have to know that when they grab fields from tables A and B, that they have to specify a join clause between those two tables. So they have to know what a join is and how to build it. They may also need to know some of the SQL language if they want to do some more advanced things. The third thing the user has to be familiar with is the specific database design of their application. They have to know what tables and fields contain the information that they want to query on. So they need to know those real table and field names, even if those names aren't very meaningful, like abbreviations and strange symbols like pound signs and underscores and things like that. They also have to know that if they grab fields from tables A and D, that they have to specify a four-table join from A to B, B to C, and C to D. So not only do they know that they have to create a four-table join, they have to know how to build each of those joins correctly, otherwise the query won't work. They also have to know how the data is physically stored. We database developers don't store everything in one big table. We normalize the data, and we also don't store things like derived values. So, for example, total price, which is really unit price times quantity, isn't normally stored because it's a derived value. So the problem is the user has to know that that field doesn't exist, and they have to know what formula to use to get that value, and they have to put it in every single time they want to create it they want to use it in a different report. Stonefield Query, on the other hand, was designed to be a very simple-to-use tool. It has a simple wizard-based interface, so it leads the user step-by-step through the process of creating a report. But more importantly, it knows the application's data. So what we'll see in a moment are nice descriptive names for tables and fields, names that are meaningful to the user rather than the real descriptive or the real underlying table and field names. It knows how to join tables, so you'll see that I won't be creating any joins or any SQL select statements or things like that anywhere. It'll automatically do that for me. It can display the data the way the user sees it in their application. So, for example, we'll see that I can query on total price, even though that field doesn't really exist. We'll talk about calculated fields and enumerated fields later on. Now, how does Stonefield Query know all this about your data structures? Well, that's because it's driven off of a data dictionary. And it's your job or the job of somebody on your team to build that data dictionary. And I'll show you in the second half of the webinar exactly how to do that. Stonefield Query is based on an incredibly fast database engine, so typically you'll get your results back at least as fast as you would in Crystal Reports, but in some cases it'll actually come back quicker because of the way you can optimize our data dictionary to match your data structures. It has extensive online help, and this help is actually customizable as well, which I'll show you later on. We support output to lots of different file formats, PDF, Excel, Word, HTML, and so on. It works with pretty much any database engine you can think of. Visual Fox Pro, SQL Server, Access, Oracle, DB2, DBase, Pervasive, MySQL running under Windows or Linux. You name it, it'll work with anything that has an ODBC driver, an OLE DB provider, or anything with an API of any kind. It supports multiple data sources, and by a data source, I mean a database with a particular structure. So, for example, in accounting systems, you often see Company 1, Company 2, Company 3 databases for different companies. Those databases have the same structure, but obviously they have different records in them. Well, if you're using something like Crystal Reports, it stores the connection information with a report. So if you run that report against another data source, you have to go and modify the structure or modify that report and change the connection string. Stonefield Query does not store connection information with the report, so you can run it against any report that uses that same data or any database that has that same structure. We also support consolidation reports, so you can actually query against databases 1, 2, and 3 at the same time, and for example, show all the invoices for all the customers or all companies at once. We also support joins across databases or connections, even if those databases are not using the same engine. For example, if you have some data in Access and some in SQL Server, you can query on both of those databases at the same time. So let's go and take a look at Stonefield Query from an end-user perspective so you can get a feel for how the product works. So this is a version of Stonefield Query that I've customized for the Northwind database. If you haven't seen it before, Northwind is a sample database that comes with SQL Server. It has tables representing, or it represents an order entry system. So it has tables for orders and products and customers, things like that. Now you notice, by the way, that the window title here is Northwind Report Writer. It doesn't say Stonefield Query. We see the Stonefield Query logo down in the lower right-hand corner, but I'll show you later on how you can actually put your own logo in there, so you can create a completely private labeled version just for your company. This is the Reports Explorer. It shows a list of the reports that I or somebody else in the network has already created. I can click on a report, I can preview it, I can print it, I can output to file, and so on. You can see that reports go inside of folders, and you can have folders inside of folders, just like you do in the Windows Explorer, although these are not real folders on your hard disk drive. They're just an organization mechanism for your reports. Every user gets their own favorites folder where they can put reports that they run fairly frequently, for example. Now, rather than running one of these reports, I'm going to go and create a new report to show you how that works. So I'm going to go over and click on the New button. Stonefield Query has several different report types. Quick Report is a row and column style report. Crosstab is for doing crosstabs or pivot tables like you might do in Excel. Labels are for doing things like barcode labels or mailing labels or other kinds of labels where things are laid out in a label style. In our next release, we're going to be supporting charting and graphing. So I'll show you that later on. That's one of the items that's here in the list, although that's not in the version that you probably have right now. So we'll just start with a quick report. So I'll choose OK. Step 1 of the quick report wizard is what do we want to call this thing. So I'll call it Sales Report. By default, Stonefield Query chooses the folder that you had selected in Reports Explorer as the folder for this report. However, I want to put it in a different folder, so I'll just click on the drop-down list and pick the Reports folder instead. Comments would be anything you want to show back over here whenever this report is selected, and that's usually things such as when the report gets run or what it's used for, things like that. So we'll say this report shows who bought what products. Oops, I'll fix my typing mistake there. I'm going to click on the next button to go to the next step. This is the big one. This is where you tell Stonefield Query what should appear in the report. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is that we're going to tell Stonefield Query what we want, not how to go and get it from the database like you'd have to with other reporting tools. You'll notice that we see nice descriptive names for our tables and fields here. These are names that are meaningful to the user as opposed to the real underlying table and field names. Also, we're not seeing all the tables and fields that belong to the Northwind database. It may not make sense, for example, to show certain tables for security reasons. Or maybe you don't want to show the user's foreign key fields because they don't know what a foreign key is and the values in that field would be meaningless to them anyway. I want to show what customers are buying my products, so I'm going to go and grab the product name, and I'll grab the company name, and I'll also go and grab total price. Now, total price doesn't actually exist in this table, although it looks to me like it does. It was there in the fields list along with the other fields. I can grab it, and as you'll see in a moment, it'll show up in our output. We'll talk about calculated fields later on. I also want to show the quantity, so I'm going to grab that one as well. But I want quantity to come out before total price. You can rearrange the fields by simply clicking on the field and dragging it up and down the list so it appears wherever you want to. Fields appear in the order that they appear in this list. Now, at any point, if you want to see what the report's going to look like, simply hit the preview button. Stonefield Query will go and do a query against the database and then display that in a report. So it just went and grabbed 2,155 records, and here's our results. So it shows me the fields I asked for: product name, company name, quantity, and total price. In the preview window, you can do things like go to the next page, the previous page, first or last page. You can go to a particular page number. You can change the zoom factor anywhere between 10 and 300%. You can also indicate how many pages you want displayed at a time. Right now we're seeing one up. You can also do find. So for example, if I look for the word tofu, Stonefield Query will find every instance of that word and highlight it and show a table of contents over at the left so I can click on a particular instance to jump to the page where that instance appears. You can also print the report right from here. You can output to file, so you can output to a PDF, Excel, Word, and so on right from within the preview window. Now, this report isn't exactly organized the way I'd like it to be. There isn't any grouping. Doesn't appear to be much in the way of sorting. There's no subtotals or grand totals, things like that. So I'm going to close the preview window and change a few things about this report. The way that you change how a field appears is either by double-clicking on it or selecting it and choosing Properties. Either way, you get a Properties dialog where you can control how this field will look. For example, I can change the column heading. If I want it to be just the word product instead of product name, I can change that. You can change the column width. By default, Stonefield Query auto-fits columns. This is similar to a feature you may have used in Excel, where it automatically snugs the columns down so they're only as wide as the widest amount of data that appears in that column, as opposed to the defined column width. This is a nice feature that it makes the report more compact and easier to read and a little bit more professional looking. And like I said, it's a nice feature you don't find in other reporting tools. However, if you want to, you can turn this off and then specify a width and tell Stonefield Query what to do if that width is too narrow, whether it should word wrap it in that column or simply cut it off after the number of characters you've specified. On the format page, you can change the alignment for this field, and as we'll see in a moment, there are actually other choices as well. On the style page, we can change the font or the color for the field, and we can also specify dynamic expressions. These are similar to conditional expressions in Excel, where, for example, you can indicate that negative numbers should come out in red and positive numbers in black, or numbers that are greater than 1,000 should be bold and italicized. You can do that kind of thing with dynamic expressions. On the grouping page, I'm going to turn on group on this field, but because by grouping on the product name, we can see all the customers that bought that product together. Once you've turned that on, you have other choices, such as showing a count in the group footer, starting each group on its own page, and if so, whether it should reset the page number to 1 or not. Create bookmarks on this field is a nice feature. If you turn this on, this will give us a table of contents on this field, and I'll show you that in a moment when we output the report. You can change the sort order from ascending to descending. You can also rearrange the grouping order. I only have one field selected, so this control down here is disabled. But if I had more than one, I could rearrange the grouping order just like I did with fields by simply dragging the field up and down in the list. We'll come back and talk about the link page later on. The comments page shows any information about this field that was entered into the data dictionary. So it's often things like a more descriptive explanation about what this field is for. Anyway, that's it for the product name field, so I'm going to choose OK. I'm also going to change the properties for the total price field. On the format page, you can see that because this is a numeric field, we have additional choices here, such as whether commas are displayed or not, whether dollar signs are shown, how many decimal places to use. What I want to do, though, is I want to turn on the sum feature. That tells Stonefield Query that I want to see subtotals at each group break and grand totals at the end of the report. So I'm going to choose OK and run the report again. And again, it just grabbed 2,155 records out of SQL Server. And again, we just have to wait for a moment while it renders those pages. And here's the results. So now this report is organized the way I'd like it to be. Here are all the customers who bought Alice Mutton and how much they spent. Here are the customers who bought aniseed syrup and so on. At the end of each group, we have a count of the number of records in that group. That's there because I turned on the show count and group footer option. We also see the sum of the total price. That's there because I turned on that sum feature. And if I go to the last page of the report and scroll down here, we can see that there are grand totals as well. Now, another difference is that over at the left, we have a table of contents on the product name field. So if I click on a particular product name, the report jumps to the page where that product appears. Some products appear more than once because they span several pages. And so if I click on the second instance of Camembert, we see that it goes to the next page of that items. Now, in order to run this report, Stonefield Query had to do a 4-table join. Customers to orders, orders to order details to products. But that's not the kind of thing that a typical end user like a secretary or sales manager would know. And nor did I need to know that. You notice that I didn't specify a join condition anywhere. I simply told it, I want the product name, the company name, the quantity, the total price. Please group on this, please sum on this. I'm done. I don't have to know the SQL language or join conditions or foreign keys or things like that. I simply tell Stonefield Query what I want, and it figures out what it has to do to give me the results that I need. Any questions so far? No? All right. Now, the problem with this report now is that it's showing every record in the database, which is not something you typically want. So I'm going to close this and go to the next step, which is filtering. I'm going to create a filter. We'll add a condition. And I'm going to specify that I'm only interested in those items that were ordered in a certain date range. So I'll go ahead and choose the order date field. You notice we have nice English expressions here. Equals, does not equal, is greater than, is less than, and so on. I'm going to choose is between because that's pretty handy for dates. So I'll put in my date range. You can either type the date or you can choose it from a drop-down calendar. So I'll choose July of 96 and pick the 31st. Now, this would be fine. This would give me those items that were ordered in July of 96. However, the next time I run the report, it might be a different date range that I'm interested in. And I wouldn't want to have to go in and modify the filter condition all the time. So I'm going to turn on Ask at Runtime. That tells Stonefield Query that I want to be prompted for the date range whenever I run this report. So I'm going to choose OK. And here's my first condition. Oops. Shown as a nice English expression. I'm going to go and add another condition. Now, you'll notice that when you specify a second and subsequent condition, you have to indicate how that condition is connected to the previous one using ands and ors with varying kinds of parentheses. Stonefield Query automatically does parentheses balancing, so you don't have to worry about those 3 closing parentheses or else the query will blow up. Stonefield Query will take care of that for you automatically. I'm going to choose the same field I did a moment ago and the same operator. Now, you'll notice that by default, Stonefield Query compares the field that you choose against the values that you enter. However, there are additional choices as well. If you click on the More button, the dialog expands, and you can see that the default is to compare this field against values. However, you can also compare against other fields. So, for example, maybe I'm only interested in those where the order date is between the required date and the ship date. You can also specify a dynamic expression. For example, there's a built-in function called date that gives today's date. So date minus 7 would be a week ago, and date minus 1 would be yesterday. So this would give me last week's results without prompting me for the date range. And if I run it next week, it would give me this week's results. And the week after, it would give me next week's results, and so on. So it always gives the previous week's results without prompting the user. Now, we don't expect that you know that there's a built-in function called date. You can always click on this expression builder button over here to bring up our expression builder, where you can choose from the same list of tables and fields that we saw earlier, but you can also choose from a drop-down list of commonly used expressions. For example, today's date, first day of the month, first day of the year, things like that, without having to know the expression to derive those formulas. I'm not going to say this filter condition. I just wanted to show you that we had additional choices. Oh, one other choice as well, by the way, is that you can indicate whether this item should appear in the filter display or not. As I'll show you in a moment, filter conditions appear in the page header, which is a very nice feature, as I'll show you. However, you may want to turn that off on an individual condition by condition basis, or even turn it off globally for the whole report. So this is how you do it for each individual condition. So I'm not going to say this condition. I'll just use cancel, and we'll just stick with this one condition for now. So I'm going to choose OK. And let's run the report again. This time, Stonefield Query prompts me for the date range. I can either accept the default dates, I can put in new dates, or I can even choose to ignore the condition for this particular run. I'm just going to leave the default dates in there and choose OK. And this time, we're only going to get 59 records. Okay, so here's the results. So we're only seeing 59 records this time. And in fact, you can see in the page header, we see the filter condition right here as a nice English expression. All right, the next step is sorting. You can see that it's initially sorted by product name because that's how we grouped it. But within product name, we can have it come out alphabetically by company. And within company, we could have it come out in, say, descending order by total price. So using this step, you have full control over how this report gets sorted. The next step is formatting. We can specify a header and footer for each page. Here's that global option I mentioned a minute ago, include filter or report header. If you turn this off, then none of the conditions will appear. Most people like to have that turned on because it very quickly answers the question, why are there only 5 pages in this report? And again, a nice feature you don't find on other reporting tools. But if you want to, you can turn that off. Summary report's a nice feature. If you go ahead and turn that on and then run the report again, it gets rid of everything except for grouped and summed fields. And it collapses the last grouping level down so it becomes a detail line. So in other words, it kind of gives you a forest of the trees, look at your data. Now we're seeing a sales by product without regard to the customer or the quantity or things like that. Orientation, automatic means that Stonefield Query will automatically change the orientation to landscape if it's too wide for portrait. Again, a nice feature you don't find in other reporting tools. However, if you want to, you can force it to a particular orientation. Template's also a nice feature. Let's just go and run this report again. And I want to point out that there are certain predefined things. Okay, so you'll notice, for example, that in addition to the fields that we've asked for, there are certain other elements in the report. For example, the page header appears center to the top of the page and it's in bold. The date appears at the top left, the page number at the top right. There are lines above and below the column headings which appear in bold. The group headings appear in bold as well. Well, what if I want the report to look different? What if I want to show a company logo in the upper left-hand corner? What if I want the date and page number to go at the bottom of the report instead? You can do that kind of a thing with a template. Let me just go and choose a different template here and run the report again. And this time you'll notice the report looks different. Now it's using a different font. This uses Tahoma instead of Arial. You'll notice that there's a dark gray box over top of the column headings instead of lines above and below, and the column headings now appear in white rather than in black. There's a light gray box over top of the group headings and so on. So using a template, you can control how this report will look. It's similar to style sheets in Microsoft Word or HTML. We provide a number of built-in templates, but we also provide a template editor so that you can go and modify the templates that we provide or even create your own templates. The last step when you're creating a report is security. By default, everyone has access to this report, but that may not be appropriate for all reports, like payroll reports or things like that. So I can remove everyone from the list and then indicate that only managers have access to this report. What that means is that only those people that are defined as managers will see this in the reports list. For everyone else, it won't appear, and it's like it doesn't exist to them at all. We can also indicate what rights managers have. If I turn this item on, then in addition to being able to run the report, managers can also delete the report from the list or modify it as well. If I don't want that, I can turn this off. I'm just going to go and put everyone back in there, and I'll give them all rights to the report. So that's it for this report. I'm going to click on the Finish button. That report now gets saved and goes into the Reports folder in my Reports Explorer. So now that I've got this report, I can preview it, I can print it. We have other locations we can send it as well. On the Output page, I can choose Email, in which case Stonefield Query will output the report as a PDF file and attach it to the email that gets sent to whomever. We can also choose File, And you can see that Stonefield Query supports lots of different file formats. There is comma delimited. Excel data only is an Excel spreadsheet, but with all the formatting information stripped out. This is handy if, for example, you want to do some pivot chart or things like that, where the formatting information would just get in the way. But there's also Excel full format, which does preserve the formatting information. We also have PDF, rich text format, DBF files, flat text files, 2 different layouts for HTML, 2 different layouts for Microsoft Word, and XML. So pretty much every kind of file format you can think of. Let's do a PDF file. So I'm just going to go and run this again. Again, it prompts me for my date range. And this time, instead of outputting to the screen, it's actually outputting to a PDF file. Here's that PDF. Let me just shrink it down a little bit here. Here's that report as a PDF. You can see it looks exactly the same as it did when we previewed it, including the table of contents over at the right. Also in the Reports Explorer, there's a sample page where you can see what this report looked like the last time you ran it. It's a pretty handy thing, so if I click on a particular report, I'm going to have to go and run the report just to see what it looks like. I can just click on the report, and it will show me what this report would look like. On the information page, we can see when this report was created, when it was last modified, who last ran it, and so on. Now let's go and create another report. Instead of clicking on the New button, though, I'm going to click on the down arrow beside New and then choose the report type I want from the drop-down list. This time I'm going to do a cross-tabulation report. The first couple steps of the cross-tab wizard are the same as they are for the quick report wizard, so I'll just go through them fairly quickly. We'll call this one Sales by Country and Product. I'm going to choose this time the country because I want to show what products are being shipped into what countries. And again, I'll choose the product name, and again, we'll choose the total price. Now, step 3 is different. Because this is a crosstab report, you have to tell Stonefield Query what goes where. And you do that by dragging the field to the appropriate spot. So I'm going to put the country in the rows, I'll put the product name in the columns, and I'll put the total price in the data area. When I hit preview, again, behind the scenes, Stonefield Query is doing a 4-table join, but this time it actually slices and dices the data, so now we get a crosstab. We can see the country in the rows, the product name in the columns, and down here we see the sum of the total price for each product and country combination. And so we can make some business decisions based on this information. For example, I can see that we're selling lots of mutton in Austria, but none in Argentina, so maybe we have to talk to our South American sales rep and find out why that is. Now, we can see that there are column totals in the report, but there aren't any row totals. The reason for that is because although we don't have that many countries, we have a lot of products. And so this report can't all appear on one page. For example, if I go to the next page, we see the same set of countries, but now a different set of products. And the next set, and so on, until I go to the last page of the report, and now we do see our row totals as well. So Stonefield Query horizontally and vertically paginates your report, just like Excel would if you had a very wide and deep spreadsheet. We support multiple fields in the row, so underneath country I could put state, and underneath state I could put city, so we could see our sales broken down at all 3 of those levels. We can also put multiple fields in the data area, so for example, in addition to just seeing the sum of the total price, I could also show a count of the number of or the number of orders in for a particular country and product. I'm going to go and grab another field, though. We'll grab order date. And instead of having the product name in the columns, let's put the order date there instead. Now, it's possible, but not very likely, that I'd want to see individual dates, like January 1st, January 2nd, and so on. What's more likely is I want to see some kind of aggregate for those dates. So if we bring up the properties dialog for that field, you can see that I can indicate that I want the date displayed as either the date, month, quarter, or year. I'll choose year and run the report again, and now we have what amounts to a comparative sales analysis by country and by year. The rest of the steps in the crosstab wizard are the same as they are for the quick report wizard. So we have filtering, we have formatting, including the template, and we have security. Let's just go and quickly do some labels. As I mentioned earlier, the label wizard can be for doing things like mailing labels, barcode labels, product labels, things like that. So we'll call these customer labels. All of the steps of the label wizard are the same as they are for the quick report wizard, so I'll just go through them fairly quickly. Here we're going to go and grab the company name, contact name, address, city, state, zip, and country. When I preview the report, rather than coming out in a row and column style, now they come out looking like labels. Now, a couple things to note. One is that Stonefield Query automatically snugs up blank rows. You notice that this address has, or this contact has an address line, whereas this one does not. Rather than showing a blank row where that address would go, Stonefield Query snugs up those rows so you don't get that goofy blank line look. Also, This is using a 4-inch wide, 1.5-inch high 2-up label. What if I wanted to use a 3-up label or different label sizes? Well, you can actually change that very simply. We'll just go through the rest of the steps here. We have filtering just like we did before. We have sorting, so I can have it come out in zip code order or city order, whatever. But in step 5, which is the formatting step, because these are labels and not things like quick reports, things like page header and footer don't apply. But what does apply is the label style. You can see that this is using an Avery 5097, which is a 1.5-inch high 2-up label, but we have all the Avery numbers built in. So if I want to use an Avery 5160 instead, which is a 3-inch wide or 3-up label, when I run the report, you notice that Stonefield Query automatically adjusts the label to match my style. With other report designers, I'd have to go in and move fields around and change the page dimensions and so on. With Stonefield Query, I just change the label style and it automatically adjusts that. And the last step is security, so that works the same as the other ones. Any questions about creating labels? By the way, if you wanted to do a barcode label, you'd simply, for example, for a product code, you'd simply go into the properties dialog, choose a barcode font, and it would then come out as a barcode label. Here's a report I created earlier. Let's just go and preview this one. It asks me for a date range. But you'll notice that this report does not look like the other ones. It's not laid out in a row and column style. It's not a crosstab. Here, every order looks like an invoice. So there's a sold to area, a shipped to area, there's a big cyan colored box here, there's subtotals and freights and so on. Let me just go and edit that and show you how that was created. You notice that brings up the quick report wizard. So even though it doesn't look like it, it originally started life as a quick report. What I did was I grabbed the fields that I wanted, then I went to step 5 and turned on advanced layout. When you do that and click on the edit button, that brings up Stonefield Query's full-featured band-oriented report designer. So if you've used things like Crystal Reports or Access or other tools, this will look pretty familiar to you. You can do pretty much anything you want to in here. You can move fields around. You can add company logos or other images. You can add other fields or calculations. You can add boxes and lines and whatever you want to make this report look exactly the way you want, which is what I did here. I moved things around. I added a box. I added subtotals and things like that. One other customization you can do, back in step 2, there was a button I didn't talk about earlier, this advanced button. If you click on this brings up a dialog where you can specify things such as you only want to see the top N records. You can also customize the SQL statement for this report. Now, obviously, this requires knowledge of the SQL language, and so it's not the kind of thing your average user would use, but you could use it to customize reports, or maybe you've got some power user like an IT manager or folks like that. You can do things like, for example, change this from an inner join to a right outer join instead of to make this query exactly the way you need it to work. Let me bring up this customer's report. Let's preview it. And it just shows a simple report, company name and city, state, zip. What I'd like to do, though, is I'd like to be able to click on the company name and have it go and show me all the orders for that customer. So I'm going to go and edit this report. And in step 2, I'm going to bring up the properties dialog for my company name field. Now, the version I've got is a pre-release of the next version, so this isn't something that exists in your version. But there's this new link page. This allows you to specify that this field should be linked to something else. For example, you can link it to an email. If you choose that, then when the user clicks on the company name field, it'll automatically launch their email client and put the email address for this person in automatically. Now, obviously, the company name isn't what I want to use as the email address. So I can indicate here what field does contain this company's email address. Same thing for a website. If I choose this, then when I click on the company name, it'll bring up my browser and automatically navigate it to their website. And so you pick which field contains the URL for that website. What I want to do here, though, is I want to link it to another report. I already have a report called Orders for Customer, and that's what I want to automatically run whenever I click on a company name. Now, that report has an Ask at Runtime filter condition. If I were to run it right now, it would prompt me for a customer ID. Well, I don't want it to do that. I want it to automatically take the customer ID from this report and pass that to the next report so it shows the orders for the selected customer. So to do that, I'm going to tell it that the customer ID condition in the other report is linked to this one by specifying a field, and the field that I want to pass it is the customer ID from this report. So let's choose OK. and run the report again. And now you notice it looks the same, except there are links on the company name fields. So if I click on a particular company name, it goes and runs that orders for customer report, but only for the customer I clicked on. So basically we have what amounts to a drill down. I can see all the orders for that customer. And you notice the preview window is now tabbed. I can go back to my customers report, click on a different customer, and it shows me the orders for that customer. And I can actually switch between these various pages and keep on drilling down. Now, you can actually drill down multiple levels. For example, I didn't do it, but we could have a drill down on the order ID, so when you click on this, that shows the details for that order. And maybe on the details report, if I click on a product name, it shows me information about that product. So you can actually drill down as many levels as you need to. Another feature that we're adding in our next release is charting. So let me just go through and show you this fairly quickly. Let's call this my sales chart. I choose the fields that I want, similar to before. So this time I'm going to choose a product category, and I'll choose the total price. Similar to the crosstab wizard, I have to tell Stonefield Query what to chart where. So I'll put the total price as the values, and I'll use the category name as my category, or my x-axis. I'm then going to preview it, and here's my chart. Now I want to change a couple things about this, make it look a little bit nicer. I don't need dollars and cents shown for the total price, so I'm just going to go and change the properties for this and indicate that I only don't want to see any decimal places. In step 4, which is formatting, I have lots of control over this chart. For example, let's kind of we can make it look nice by turning on multiple colors. We can indicate that we should use cylinders or pyramids instead of rectangles. We can have a different chart type. For example, we can go with a bar chart instead of a column chart, or maybe a pie chart. And with a pie chart, we can do things like pull out slices, for example. We can specify what the titles for the different axes should be, and what the fonts are. I noticed that my titles on the x-axis are kind of all jumbled together because some of them are fairly long. So I can go and stagger them so that way they don't bump into each other. I can change things about the legend, such as where it goes, whether I see a legend or not, where it goes, what kind of things should be shown. For example, do I want values shown in the legend, or do I just want the names? Or do maybe I want percentages shown instead of values, things like that. We can also use gradients. So lots of control over the format. You can specify a background color. You can specify a gradient for the chart itself. You can specify the chart size. You can indicate what kind of border you want, and whether it's shadowed or not, whether you have grid lines, and so on. So you have a lot of control over this. You can actually go and do things such as rotating the chart visually. You can move it around. You can zoom in or zoom out. You can change the depth. If you click on this button, this will actually bring up an editor where you have a lot of control over this chart, a lot more control than you even have just in the chart wizard. So this is our new feature. One other thing that I wanted to show you is that we also support different series. So if I go and grab the order date, and we put that in the series, and again, like crosstabs, I don't want to see individual dates. I want to display the years instead. Then when I preview the report, now we get different series, so I'm showing each bar showing different years. So that's our new chart wizard that'll be out in our next release. All right, just one or two more things to show you before we move on. Under the Tools menu is a Maintain Users and Groups dialog. This is where you set up what users can get into Stonefield Query and what groups they fall into. So that's how it knows which people are managers, which people are clerks, and so on, and that's how our role-based security is managed. Also under the Tools menu is a template editor. This is where you can modify the templates that we provide, or even create your own templates. If I click on the Elegant template and edit it, you notice that brings up the Advanced Report Designer, but instead of modifying a report, we're now modifying a template. So for example, this is not a real field, this is just a placeholder for a field in the detail band. This is a placeholder for a group headering, and this is a placeholder for a column heading, and so on. So like I said, with this you can modify the templates. You can also import and export template layouts. We also provide a scheduler under the tools menu is a schedule function where you can go and specify whether this report should run daily, weekly, or monthly and at what time. And if you choose daily, whether it's only on weekdays or every day. If you choose weekly, you can specify what days of the week and so on. So using the report scheduler, you can have it run reports and email them or print them or store them to output to file at any kind of schedule you want to. How does Stonefield Query know what tables and fields to display to me and what nice descriptive names to use? How did it know it had to do a 4-table join when I ran these reports? Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, Stonefield Query is driven off of a data dictionary. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually close Stonefield Query, and then I'm going to go and blow it away. And then we're going to go and recreate it from scratch. So I'm going to get rid of all the files in this folder. I'm just going to keep a couple of things here. I want to keep a logo and custom help file and so on. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and launch the Stonefield Query configuration utility. This is the key component in the Stonefield Query SDK that allows you to create a customized version of Stonefield Query for your application's database. The first step is to create a new project. So I'm going to go over and click on the New Project button in the toolbar, and I'll choose a folder where I want my project files to go. So I'll put them in here. Okay, so it's created a project for me. The next step is to go and read in the structure of an existing database. So I'm going to go up to the Objects menu and choose Add Database. Now, there are several ways you can connect to the database. If you're using an ODBC DSN, you simply choose it from the drop-down list. If you'd rather put in a connection string instead, then you can type that here. If you want to use an OLE DB provider, you can either type the connection string or you can click on the Build button, and that'll bring up a dialog where you can visually build that connection string. If you're using Visual Fox Pro Data, you can specify whether you want to use a database container, a free table directory, or some DBCX metadata. You can also specify an empty database, which will just create a database record without any information in it. This is used if you're going to be querying against non-traditional data sources, such as a web service or SQL Server running over HTTP or flat text files or things that there isn't an ODBC driver for example. I'm going to use an ODBC DSN. I'm going to pick my Northwind SQL Server database. I'm using SQL Integrated Security, so I'm not going to bother filling in a username and password. By default, Stonefield Query puts opening and closing square brackets around names that contain illegal SQL characters, because that's what the default is for ODBC. However, if I want to, or if my database engine requires different characters, I can put them in here. Like, for example, MySQL uses the reverse apostrophe, so I'd use those instead. By default, Stonefield Query will include all tables it finds in the database in the data dictionary. However, if you don't want that, you can turn this option off, and then a dialog will pop up, and you can specify which tables you want included. By default, we don't include any views, but if you turn this on, then it will pick up views as well. I have my options set now, so I'm going to choose OK. And what Stonefield Query is doing now is it's going through my Northwind SQL Server database, pulling in all the tables, fields, relationships between tables, descriptive names for tables and fields, and so on. Now, one of the things that it found was that the employees table is actually joined to itself. There's a reports to column that contains the ID of each person's manager, which is a foreign key to another record in the same table. Now, if you were to do a SQL select statement where you showed employee names and their manager names, you'd have to reference the employees table twice and specify an alias for the second instance. Well, Stonefield Query needs to do something similar, but it's kind of more powerful than just another alias. We call it a subtable because it does have a lot more capabilities, and I don't have time to go into those, but they are described in our documentation. Anyway, it wants to know what I want to call this. I'm going to call it managers because that's what this represents, is a subset of employees for managers. So here's my Northwind database. Here are all the tables it read in. If we drill down to the customers table, for example, we can see that the company name field is a 40-character varchar field with a nice descriptive name of company space name. It also read in relationships, so it knows that the customers table joins with the orders table by matching the customer ID field in each of these tables. So the next step is customizing the data dictionary, and how much work you have to do there depends upon a couple of things. One, how many tables and fields you have. Obviously, if you have 300 tables, you have more work to do than if you have 10 tables. The second thing it depends upon is how much information Stonefield Query could read from your database. If it could read in descriptive names and relationships and things like that, then obviously you have less work to do because it has that information. If it couldn't read them in, either because your database engine doesn't support those kinds of things, or you just didn't fill them in your database, then obviously we couldn't pull in descriptive field names and relationships, and so you'll have to spend some time creating those in the configuration utility. Now, it may be kind of a big job, but it's something you only have to do once. If later on your data structures change, you don't have to go and rebuild the data dictionary from scratch. You simply go and click on the refresh button on the toolbar. This will reread the data dictionary, pulling in any new tables and fields, and not overwriting anything that you've already customized. Other kinds of customization you can do besides putting in descriptive names and relationships are to indicate that certain tables and fields maybe shouldn't be visible to the user. For example, some of the tables I have in here are for testing purposes. I don't want the user to be able to query on them, so I simply turn off the reportable status. And you can see by the red X in the list that these tables won't show up in Stonefield Query. So I'm going to do that for a few of these. Now, you can also do the same thing at the field level. For example, the customer ID field is a foreign key. If the user never sees that field in their application, why would they see it in Stonefield Query? So we can make that field not reportable as well. Now, this is kind of all or nothing thing, though. Either all users can see these tables and fields, or no users can. However, we also support role-based security at the data dictionary level. Just like we did at the reports level, we support it at the data dictionary level. Now, instead of calling them roles, we actually call them user groups, because when we did some usability testing, we found that people understood the term user group more easily than they understood the term role. So we already have one group in here called administrators. So I'm just going to go and create a few others. I'll create one called managers, and I'll create one called clerks. And then we can indicate what tables and fields are visible to these different groups. For example, my employees table contains sensitive employee information. I don't want it available to everyone. By default, everyone has access to this table because user groups is empty. But since that's not appropriate here, I can indicate that only managers or managers and administrators or whatever combination of these that I want. So only managers will have access to this table. What happens then is that if somebody is not defined as a manager, when they go to create a new report, the employees table will not show up in their report in the fields list or the tables list. And if they pick a report that somebody else created that contains fields from the employees table, they'll get a warning message telling them that they cannot run this report because it contains information they don't have access to. Now, we can do it at the table level. We can also do it at the field level. For example, maybe I want everyone to be able to access the customer ID field in the group table, but not the group field. That should only be available to managers. So now this field will only appear for those people who are managers. Other kinds of customization I can do are to define calculated fields. You notice the orders table is a normalized table. It contains quantity and unit price fields, but it doesn't have a total price field, and nor should it, because that's a derived value. But the problem is the user's going to want to query on total price, and they'd have to know that it doesn't exist. They'd have to know the formula to use to calculate it, and they'd have to put it in every time they want to use it in a different report. So to make it easier for the user, I'm going to go and add a new field to my data dictionary. Now, this doesn't add it to your database. We never write to your database. This is just stored in the data dictionary only. So we'll call it total price. It'll be a currency field. We'll give it a caption of total price. The difference between caption and heading is that the caption is the name that appears in the Stonefield Query dialogues, whereas heading is the default column heading in reports. Normally these are the same, but they could be different. For example, maybe I want to use an abbreviation here for extended price. And the user can actually change the user cannot change the caption, but they can change the column heading on a report-by-report basis, as we saw earlier when I was creating reports. By default, I want $signs displayed, and I want 3 places or commas every 3 places and 2 places after the decimal. And again, these are just the defaults. The user can override these on a report-by-report basis. Now, on the calc page, I have to tell Stonefield Query what the output expression or the formula used to calculate the value for this field. Now, I could type it, but it's a lot easier to use the expression builder, so I'm just going to bring that up. And we'll indicate that this is going to be quantity times unit price. And so there's my new calculated field. We can see by the icon in the list that it's not a real field. It looks like a little calculator, so it's a visual indication that this is a calculated field. Now, we have another choice here as well, whether this is a Stonefield Query expression or not. With this turned on, then these 2 fields are requested in a SQL select statement. Both fields are brought back, and then this formula is applied to those two fields to give us the result set. With Stonefield Query expression turned off, then this expression is sent as is to the database engine. Now, there are pros and cons for both approaches. With Stonefield Query expression turned on, you have more power and flexibility because you can specify pretty much anything you want to in the output expression. You can specify one of the 500 functions built into Stonefield Query. You can specify user-defined functions or scripts, things that your database doesn't understand. With Stonefield Query expression turned off, you get better performance because rather than pulling down two fields and having Stonefield Query do the result, only the result of this expression is sent back down the wire, and so obviously you have less data coming down. That's especially true if the user filters on total price is greater than 50, because in that case, with Stonefield Query expression turned on, we have to request those two fields, but we can't specify a filter condition because the database engine may not understand this expression. So we have to pull it down for every record, then apply the condition, or then apply the expression, then apply the filter condition. So obviously a lot more data comes down the wire. With Stonefield Query expression turned off, we send this expression along with this expression is greater than 50 in a where clause. So not only does it only bring down the one field, the result, it only brings it down for those records that match the filter condition. So obviously a lot less data and a lot better performance. The nice thing is you get to decide on a field-by-field basis whether you want better performance or whether you need more flexibility. In this case, this is an expression my database engine understands, and so we'll get better performance by having this turned off. Other kinds of customization we can do. In my orders table, I have a ship via field that you can see is an integer field. It contains a 1, 2, or a 3. Now, these values aren't actually looked up anywhere. A 1 means FedEx, 2 means UPS, 3 means mail. So you might consider this to be an enumerated field. We see this a lot in accounting systems where, for invoice status, P means posted, I means invoiced, V means voided. The problem is if the user picks this field for a report, they're going to see a 1, 2, or a 3, not FedEx, UPS, or mail, as they'd expect to. So to make it easier for the user, on the special page, I'm going to tell Stonefield Query that this field contains enumerated values. And I'll define a 1 as FedEx, a 2 as UPS, and a 3 as mail. So the user will never see a 1, 2, or 3 in Stonefield Query. They'll only see FedEx, UPS, or mail. In my products table, I have a category ID field that's a foreign key to the categories table because every product falls into a category of some kind, like beverages, condiments, and so on. So if the user wants to show the category name and the product name on the report, they have to choose the category name field from the categories table and the product name field from the products table. Well, the problem is a lot of users don't understand this whole data normalization thing. In the data entry screen for products, there's probably a text box where they type in the product name and a drop-down list of categories the product can belong to. So the problem is the user thinks the product name and the category name are stored in the same place, and they don't understand that there are different tables involved and foreign keys and joins and all that jazz. So to make it easier for the user, on the special page, I'm going to tell Stonefield Query that rather than displaying the foreign key values in this field, which the user doesn't understand anyway, instead I want to display from the categories table the contents of the category name field. So what Stonefield Query will do is look up the category ID in the categories table, find the matching record, grab the category name, and display that instead. To make it more obvious to the user, I'm going to change the caption from category ID to category name because that's what they're going to see. Now, if for some reason you do want them to be able to choose the foreign key and the name as well, then in that case you wouldn't change the properties of this field. You'd simply add a calculated field and mark that one instead as display field from related table. All right, so we've done lots of customization of our data dictionary. Well, one last thing to do before I go and try this out. Under the configuration node down here, I'm going to choose application. I don't want this to be called Stonefield Query. I want to call it Northwind, oops, I'm going to spell that right, Northwind Report Writer. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, Stonefield Query supports or allows you to private label or brand your application. So instead of calling it Stonefield Query, you can call it Northwind Report Writer. Now, and to support that, you can actually change lots of other things. For example, the email address that's used for support, we can change that to support@bobsoftware.com. And for sales, to sales@bobsoftware.com. We can change the sales phone number, the support fax number. We can change the company website to bobsoftware.com. We can change the company name to Bob Software Inc. We can even specify a different logo that appears on the desktop. Just go in and find a logo here. Oops. So using these different settings, you can completely private label or brand Stonefield Query so that the users don't know it's Stonefield Query from Stonefield Software. As far as they're concerned, it's something that you created for them. Now, one slight glitch, if the user launches the Northwind report writer and clicks on the help button or presses F1, they're going to get the Stonefield Query help file, which would kind of destroy that illusion of private labeling. So if you click on this button in the toolbar, this will generate a customized help file for this project. It'll replace Stonefield Query with Northwind report writer, our company name with yours, our logo, our website, our email address, and so on, to give you a private labeled help file as well. And we provide the help file as source. So if you want to go and further customize it, such as putting in your own tutorials or other kinds of custom information, you can do that and then generate a CHM file that you deploy to your customers. Speaking of deployment, we don't expect that you're a wizard at using things like Install Shield or Weiss or things like that. If you click on this button in the toolbar, this will generate a customized setup.exe for your customized version of Stonefield Query. It'll grab all the core Stonefield Query files plus your configuration files and generate a setup.exe that has your name and your product name and so on. So you can then put it on a CD or put it on a website or email it to somebody, and it will then go and install the Northwind report writer. All right, let's go and try this out. I could double-click on an icon on my desktop, but there's a shortcut button in the toolbar here, so I can just go ahead and click on that. And let me just go and log in here, and let me just make this window a little bit smaller. There we go. All right. So you'll notice that we see the Northwind Traders logo rather than the Stonefield Query logo. It's called Northwind Report Writer, and under Help About, we see www.bobsoftware.com, support@bobsoftware.com, and so on. And if I bring up the help, you can see that the help is also displays the Northwind logo. It's called Northwind Report Writer. And we see Bob Software Inc., www.bobsoftware.com, and so on. So not only is the application private labelable, so is the help file as well. Now let's go and create some sample reports to go and see how my data dictionary changes worked. We'll create one called Products. First thing to notice, we don't see those tables that I said were not reportable, things like 1099 categories and so on. Those were not reportable to anybody, so they don't show up. Also, we don't see the employees table because it's only available to managers, and I am not a member of the managers group. In the customers table, we don't see the customer ID field because that field was marked as not reportable. And in the group field, we don't see that group field because that field was only available to managers as well. I want to show some product information. So I'm going to go and grab the category name, which remember is really the category ID field. So it's that foreign key field back to the categories table, which contains values like 1 or 5 or 75. And we'll go and grab the product name, and let's go and group on category name. Now, when we run the report, you notice that we don't see category ID. We see the category name, beverages, condiments, dairy products, and so on. And it's sorted alphabetically by the category name, not numerically by the ID. So in other words, the user sees what they expect to see, and doesn't have to worry about things like foreign keys and joins and stuff like that, which Stonefield Query has to do behind the scenes. Let's go and create another report. Call this one Orders. And I'm going to go and grab the order date ID, the order date. The ship via, remember, is that enumerated field where 1 means FedEx and 2 is UPS and so on. And we'll also go and grab the unit price, quantity, and total price, which remember is our calculated field. When we run the report, again, Stonefield Query goes and grabs 2,155 records out of SQL Server, and we just have to wait for a moment while it renders those pages. And like I said, there we go. And we notice that for ship file, we don't see a 1, 2, or 3. We see mail, FedEx, UPS, and we can see that the extended price is our unit price times quantity. Let's go and do something a little bit more complicated then. In my customers table, I'm going to go and add a new calculated field. I'm going to call it CSZ, which will be a 40-character wide field, and that stands for city, state, and zip. So in other words, we're going to get a formatted address line. Now on the calc page, I could put a pretty simple expression which concatenates the city region, and postal code fields together. The problem is we have customers in Germany and Denmark and South Africa and so on, and not every country formats their address lines the way that we do here in North America. For example, in Germany, they put the postal code before the city name. So I can't put in a simple output expression which would give me a country-sensitive formatted address line. So instead, I'm going to call a script. Let me just bring up the expression builder, and I'm going to call a script named getCSZ. I'm going to pass it the city and region, postal code, and country fields. Okay? So there's my calculated field. Whenever the user picks this field for report, for every record it's going to output, it's going to call this CSZ script or function, passing it the city, region, postal code, and country values from the current record. Now, getCSZ doesn't exist, so we have to go and create it. I'm going to scroll down to my scripts node down here and create a new script. I'm going to call it getCSZ. You can write this script in Visual Fox Pro, VBScript, or JavaScript, whichever language you're more comfortable coding in. I'm going to use the Julia Childs method of demos here. I'm going to paste some existing code in here, and then I'm just going to right-click and choose Zoom so you can see that a little bit better. So here's my script code. It accepts 4 parameters because that's what the calculated field passed it. And then we check to see if the country is Germany, we're going to put the postal code, space, and the city name. If it's US or Canada, we'll do something, we'll have the city, a comma, and a space, the state or province, a space, and the postal code, zip code. Any other kind of country will do something similar but no comma. And at the end, we return the results back to Stonefield Query. Now, this is a pretty simple script. We're just concatenating 3 strings together based on the value of a 4th one. However, you could do something a lot more complicated. For example, you could instantiate a COM object like Excel and call some method. You could call a web service. You could call a function in a CDLL. You can do whatever you want to. We don't care what your script code does, as long as at the end you return a value back to Stonefield Query that represents the value of that function or that script. So let's go and call Stonefield Query again. Oops. And I'll go and create another report. We'll call it customers. And we're going to go and grab our company name and city, state, zip. We run the report, and here's the results. Here's a German company, so we see the postal code before the city name. Here's a Canadian one, so we have city, comma, province, space, postal code. So in other words, the user is getting what they expect, a nicely formatted address line that varies from country to country. They don't know that this isn't a field stored in the database. As far as they're concerned, it's just something that they can grab. Behind the scenes, of course, there might be some complicated script that does whatever is necessary to give them the results they need for that report. Let's talk about scripts in a little bit more detail. Stonefield Query actually has 3 different kinds of scripts. This is what we call a user script because you specify what the name of the script is and where it gets called from. Typically, user scripts are called from the output expression of calculated fields, but they can also be called from lots of other places, such as from within the Advanced Report Designer, from a page header or footer, from within other scripts, for example. A second kind of script is an event script. Let me go and create a new script here. And rather than typing its name, I'm going to choose it from a drop-down list. These are all the different events that fire within Stonefield Query. So, for example, there's an application.afterSetup script. This fires after Stonefield Query has done all of its setup tasks, but before the Reports Explorer appears. Data engine.finalize SQL statement fires just as the SQL select statement is being finalized for a particular query, allowing you to modify it if you need to. Before login fires before the user is asked to log in. So if you put some code into a particular event handler, Stonefield Query will execute that code and perhaps change the behavior or the appearance of the application. Again, I have some existing code that I wrote in VBScript, so let me just go and paste. Let's just zoom it up here again. So, first thing you notice is that every event script gets passed a reference to the Stonefield Query application object. The reason that we pass that is because it's quite likely you're going to call some method or reference some member of our application model. For example, here we're going to go and grab a reference to the user's member and then call its login method so we can log the user in automatically. So, if I go and launch Stonefield Query again, you notice this time it doesn't ask me to log in. And if I choose Help, About, you notice it automatically logged me in as the admin user. That's because the before login script fired, which logged me in as the admin user, and so there's no need to display a login dialog. A third kind of script is a data object script. For example, let's suppose that rather than issuing a SQL select statement for this table, I want instead to call a stored procedure. Well, how would Stonefield Query know what procedure to call and what parameters to pass it? Well, I can create a script for this table by clicking on the Create Data Access Script link down here. So not only is this useful for things like stored procedures, it can also be used if you create, for example, virtual tables. Stonefield Query supports virtual tables just like we do calculated fields, tables that don't really exist. So they're kind of like a view, except rather than just having a predefined SQL statement, you can actually indicate, you can put in some procedural code that where, for example, maybe you call a stored procedure, get the result set back, do some massaging of it, go and issue a SQL select, combine those two result sets together into one, do some more massaging, then call a COM object, and so on. As long as we don't care what your code does, as long as at the end you return the result set back to Stonefield Query as either a cursor, an XML string, or an ADO record set. We also support scripting at the database level. So, for example, there are two different kinds of scripts for databases. The Open Data Source script isn't used very often. This is used if you need to customize the behavior of what happens when Stonefield Query opens a data source. Like I said, that's not used very often. What's used more frequently is the Get Data Sources script. If you click on this creates a script with the name database name.getDataSource, in this case, northwind.getDataSource. And the idea of this script is that you want to define to Stonefield Query how to connect to the data source the user can query against. So this is used for several purposes. One is so you can specify what the connection string is or the location of a database on your customer's machine, because it's quite likely that it'll be different than what it is for your system. Or if they have multiple data sources like company 1, company 2, company 3, you can define those multiple data sources, and that way the user can query against all of those different data sources, either individually or simultaneously. So again, I have some existing script here. I'm just going to paste it in and then zoom it up so you can, see a little bit better. I'm not going to go through this code in detail, but there's a data sources collection that maintains a set of the different data sources the user can query against. It has an add item method. The first parameter is the type of data source. So we have ODBC, if you use an ODBC driver, SQL XML if you want to hit SQL Server over HTTP, ADO if you want to use an ADO record set, VFP if you want to use Visual Fox Pro data, and so on. The second parameter is the descriptive name to display to the user when they go to open the database. Once you've added the data source, you then specify some properties. Here we'll use the SQL Server driver against the Northwind database on my local server. Here's another one where we're going to specify that we want to use the access driver, and so I specify the location of the MDB file. So using this script, you can specify what data sources Stonefield Query can query against and how to connect to them. If you have a lot of tables in your data dictionary, like a lot of times in accounting systems, we see 300 or more tables, it's kind of a lot to ask for the user to choose from a drop-down list of 300 tables and pick the one that they want. So to make it easier for the user, we have this concept called data groups. It's a way of logically segregating your tables. They kind of work like the way modules do in an accounting system. So let me go and create some data groups here. We'll create one called Accounts Receivable. And we'll create one called Order Entry. And we'll create one called Inventory Control. And we can then indicate what tables belong to which groups. For example, in my accounts receivable group, I'll have customers and territories. In my inventory control group, I'll have products and suppliers. In my order entry group, I'll have customers. You notice a table can belong to more than one data group, and products. And we'll also have order details and orders. Now, if you don't like the term data group, you can actually change that. Under the configuration node here under data, we can change it to something else. For example, we could call it module or application or something like that. So now when I launch Stonefield Query again and create a new report, you notice there's a new control that didn't appear here before called module. So for example, if I choose accounts receivable, then I only see those tables that are in the accounts receivable module. If I choose order entry, I only see order entry tables. If I choose all, then we see all tables, but they're at least still broken down by data groups. So here's my accounts receivable tables, here's my inventory control, my order entry, and so on. So this makes it a lot easier for the user to be able to pick which tables they want to be able to query on instead of having to dig through a large. The other thing I wanted to show you is that you can actually query against more than one database. Not data source now, where it's the same database, same database structure, but different content. But if you have different databases, you can actually query against multiple databases. So I'm going to go and add another database to the data dictionary here. This time I'm going to choose a Visual Fox Pro database. I'm just going to choose the folder where that exists and let it go and do its thing. So it goes and pulls in the data structure for that database. You can see I now have two of them here. I'm going to specify that this history table is also in my accounts receivable module. And I'm going to specify a relationship. I'm going to add a relationship here between my history table and my customers table, where the account number matches the customer ID. And as I mentioned earlier, if you have a complex join, you can put that in instead. Okay, let's go and launch Stonefield Query one last time and create a new report. And I only want accounts receivable. And I'm going to go and grab the company name from customers, and I'm going to go and grab the activity code, date, and description from history. When we run the report, we're getting 1,628 records, and we'll see the results in just a moment here. But the important thing to keep in mind, the company name is coming from SQL Server. The rest of the fields are coming from Visual Fox Pro. So, although this is kind of an unusual situation, querying against two different databases in different database engines, it's very common that you might want to query against two different SQL Server databases, or, say, a SQL Server and Oracle, things like that. If you're, for example, integrating two different applications together and you want Stonefield Query to be able to query against both of those databases.